Hello everyone, good evening. Thank you for the organizers for giving us this opportunity to engage in a public debate. Too rarely do we engage in a real public debate, and I think the community should be applauded for making every effort in order to make that happen. I'm Kshama Sawant. I'm the Socialist Alternative candidate running for City Council position 2. I am also a member of the American Federation of Teachers, Local 1789. I'm a community college teacher, and we have people from our union here. And I teach economics. I am one of the many part-time teachers who, despite their qualifications, despite having worked hard, are not able to get full-time work, get a full-time salary simply because the cuts have been descending so harshly on public education. And everywhere you look, nationwide, statewide, citywide, you see the same phenomenon. And as an immigrant, as a woman of color, as a part-time worker, I know firsthand the conditions that the majority of people in this city live in. For the most of us, Seattle has become an increasingly unaffordable place to live. We're getting wages that are not keeping up with the cost of living, especially the cost of housing and the cost of healthcare. And I am the only candidate running for local office who is fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage. And I think that anybody who I have to say, anybody who does not feel a sense of urgency to bring about this change in our city, it's not somebody who's living on $15 an hour. And if people don't agree with you, tell them, how about you live on less than $15 an hour for a week and tell me how it goes for you. I think we need people on City Council who feel that sense of urgency. And I think it's very interesting to see what's happening on City Council and also my opponent, Richard Conlin. You see a lot of these politicians paying lip service to a lot of these questions. You'll see politicians today talking about $15 an hour, but if you try to pin them down, they have nothing specific to say. If you ask them, when are you going to fight for this? When are you actually going to put an ordinance? Are you going to put an ordinance for this in 2014, 2020, 2030? When is this going to happen? We need somebody who's actually going to advocate for this. We're also calling for a tax on millionaires. This city is awash with wealth, and you have very wealthy people and then a huge low-wage workforce. We're calling for a tax in order to fund mass transit and education. And my opponent, Richard Conlin, was the only person who voted against paid sick leave. He voted to criminalize panhandling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm honored to have served as your council member. I'm running for re-election to position 2. My name is Richard Conlin. 4 years ago, my colleagues asked me to be council president in 2009. They re-elected me 2 years later in the face of the recession, and because we had tremendous decisions that we had to deal with. Major transportation decisions, how do we bring the economy back? What are we going to do about the future of Seattle? We worked very hard. We put together an economic recovery strategy. We had a number of different things that we did, a whole series of steps that we took, and we were successful in bringing Seattle back faster than the rest of the country. We're not perfect. We haven't achieved all of the things that we need to do, but we are actually doing things better than we had before, and we have an unemployment rate that most cities in this country would really be envious of. I worked on those big issues. I've also worked on your neighborhood issues. I got the funding for the Linden Avenue Main Street, the Main Street that has now been fully developed to provide the sidewalks that people in Linden Avenue were asking for years. It was the centerpiece of their neighborhood plan. We now have in design and ready for full funding, and we've got almost all the funding in place, for a pedestrian bridge across I-5, connecting the light rail station and North Seattle Community College. That's going to be a tremendous asset for the people of this community. I've worked with you on a lot of other issues. I listen, I work carefully, and I do that because that's my experience and background. I was one of the 3 people who got the Central Area Neighborhood Plan started. And I've worked on neighborhood plans in my entire career on the City Council and worked to support your neighborhoods. My goals for my next term are to make sure that we continue to build transit, that we build affordable housing, make sure that people have those opportunities, support our education system, make sure that the schools have the things that they need, and institute a preschool program, a universal preschool program. The council has started on that work, and we expect to make that happen. I have 3 kids who graduated from Garfield High School, went all the way through Seattle Public Schools. I know what the needs are. I know what we should be doing there. I also want to make sure that we take care of public safety. Here in the North End, we need to rebuild the North Precinct and get a North Precinct that's really going to serve people. I worked heavily on domestic violence issues to make sure that we have the right kinds of domestic violence programs for our city, and we need to take care of downtown issues. We've got some issues and problems there. Finally, I'm committed to working on human services. When I was president of the council, we made sure that we not only did not cut human services in the recession at a time when our budget was taking a whole lot of hits, but we actually added funds for human services. And I'm very proud of some of the endorsements I've had. Hunger Fighter of the Year from Food Lifeline, the Take Action Award from the King County Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the awards from Casa Latina for Social Visionary of the Year. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
I request that everybody refrain from applauding. The support is great, but I have a limited amount of time to make really important arguments. It's really interesting to me to hear Richard Conlin say that I listen and I pay attention to neighborhoods because all evidence is to the contrary. What we're seeing is the last 2 decades, neighborhood opinions, neighborhood needs have been shoved aside in the name of development, and we are not against density, we are not against development, that's very important, but it's a question of whose input do you take, who do you invite to the table? Do you invite corporations and real estate businesses, or do you invite ordinary people who are going to be affected by those policies? And I would urge you to look at the company Mr. Conlin keeps. He got the maximum donation from BNSF, which is the main corporation driving the environmentally destructive coal terminal. And it's really also interesting to hear him talk about mass transit. He has worked overtime to really put obstacles in the way of mass transit. Look at the way he pushed the tunnel. He called it, dishonestly, he called it a green alternative, and this tunnel is not going to accommodate any mass transit, and he ignored environmental reviews, and he's actually a perfect example of a council member who really expedites things, overnight in order to make sure that corporations' needs are met, and really drags his feet and says, oh, we can't do this. He'll always tell you, my opponent is, she's new, but, I know how to get things done. But what he means, that's code. Getting things done is code for, getting things done for corporations. And it's important for us to look through that double speak. And for all this, he gets paid $120,000 a year. How many people here get paid that much? I have pledged that as a city council member, I will only take the average worker's wage and the rest will be donated to social justice movements. In position 2, at least this year, your choice is clear. You can either vote for 4 more years of business as usual corporate politics, or you can vote for a real working class champion.
Very much. Appreciate the opportunity again. My job as a city council member is to figure out ways in which to get things done for all the people of this city. And I'll give you an example of the kind of things that we've done. Recently, we put together on the Board of Health a program to take back unwanted drugs and medicines. It's going to be funded by the pharmaceutical companies. They didn't like it. That program is going to go into effect next January, and it's going to give you the opportunity to get those drugs and medicines that are potential sources of poisoning and that are going to cause environmental pollution if they're disposed of improperly, recovered safely and effectively. That's the kind of work that I do in order to make things happen for all the people. I want to say that I really applaud the efforts that Ms. Sawant has done to try and raise the issue of the $15 an hour wage. It's a great cause to be thinking about. I went to SEIU 775, who are the principal sponsors of this movement, and I talked to them about it. And we talked about how we get a strategy to increase wages. They appreciate the fact that she's advocating this, but they endorse me. Because they know I'm the person who can figure out how you get from where we are now to higher wages in a systematic, thoughtful, and careful way, in a way that's really going to work and not wind up being something that's struck down by the courts or otherwise endangered. I've also worked very hard on a lot of other issues around this city. I just recently met with some East African immigrants who are talking to me about how important it is that they have the kind of things that they need to have in order to get businesses going and to make their businesses function in the city. We have lots of opportunities to work together. We need to think about the fact that it's labor, business, community members, environmentalists, all of us have the same stake in Great Seattle. I'm proud to have the endorsement of all of those folks. I have the endorsement of the Labor Council, the many leaders of the business community, the Sierra Club, the Washington Conservation Voters. I'm rated outstanding by the Municipal League, and I've done a lot of great things in this city, and I look forward to doing more. Thank you.
My question is about affordable housing. I'm a homeowner, but I've been helping my nephew trying to find affordable housing in the city. And we're looking at the newspaper articles last week about how expensive rental housing is. He ended up with paying over $700 for a little apartment, no kitchen, about as big as my laundry room. So I've watched the city council has approved tax breaks for developers, and I'm not totally against tax breaks or restricting developers in a progressive way. But to subsidize market rate housing for Google workers and Amazon workers, people who make over median wage, how can we change the way development is restricted in order to really get development that would house people affordably who aren't wealthy, who make minimum wage, who make an average wage, and not just give away our tax dollars to developers who those tax dollars could be used in the neighborhood. Thank you.
So I think this is a very good question. Thanks to David for asking that. Of course, we have to fight to end the tax breaks, end the corporate subsidies for big corporations, and we need to lower the tax burden on small businesses and small owners. And property taxes need to be made progressive. But in reality, Dave, the heart of David's question is about how can we make housing affordable for young people today who are stuck in low-wage jobs, stuck with student debt, and they have a triple whammy with the skyrocketing cost of housing. And economists will tell you that that's because of demand and supply. It's not. It's because nationally, a huge real estate corporations are swooping down and are artificially jacking up rental rates because that's speculative investment, that's price gouging. The only antidote to that is rent control. And I invite you all to talk to me about that. We can have a forum entirely on rent control. And I know people will say that the state outlaws it. Well, so was gay marriage. Gay marriage was outlawed, civil rights were outlawed, and fought for that, and we fight for this too.
As Ms. Sawant acknowledged, rent control is not legal, and if rent control was passed by the City Council, even leaving aside the question of whether it's a good policy, it would be struck down by the courts. If she would like to do something about that, she would need to run for the legislature. Affordable housing is something that we've got to develop a whole comprehensive strategy. There's no one answer that's going to get you affordable housing. As Councilmember O'Brien pointed out, we need to do it for both low-income people and for workforce housing, for people who are in the workforce and who need to find places to live. One of the things that I've recently done is get approved the Capitol Hill Development Agreement, which is an agreement for the Sound Transit property on Capitol Hill. That is going to provide 36% of the new units are going to be affordable at a range of housing. That's what we call for in a comprehensive plan, a 36 to 40% goal. We can do that. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and a lot of cooperation. We need to have everybody at the table and making it happen.
The guy's situation much simple what is you said. It is exactly what is happening right now. And I speak right now to everybody because situation very simple and I explained to you where it's a point. 2 weeks ago, as a meeting, woman paid for Southern partial never show a council a woman. When women in Seattle make 30% less. Why she don't show? Her salary $125,000, and I think her husband, a very famous attorney, so her salary together in family more than $300,000 possible. So she belongs not only 1%, she belongs 1 to 1%. Why I give you this example about Celebration? Because it's a key what is we have right now in Seattle Council Chamber. Without clean this dirty crooks, nothing will be changed. When we don't bring a new blood, because we tired from this soup, chicken soup, what is we eat again and again every day for last 30 years. We've fallen and fallen and fallen. We right now saying like a Russia, Brazil, or Congo. Do you understand about what I'm talking about? My question, when we can clean this dirty chamber, what is operate like a crook and mafia? When this happens, send up America, clean this dirty chamber.
The question was hard to decipher, but the question, it sort of sums it up as, how can we cleanse the city council? And yes, I mean, there's a point to this question in the sense that on a good day, you have maybe one or two voices representing ordinary working people. The vast majority of the city establishment here, political establishment, are, they are greasing the wheels for corporations, the super wealthy, the Downtown Seattle Association. So you want to know how to make things change? You have to step forward. People have to be politically engaged. What serves the interests of the incumbents is having a disengaged political environment, having people be turned off because nothing's changing. Well, the only way to change it is for us to be involved and demand a change. We should demand a change in City Hall and say that it's time for all these incumbents who are not representing us to move out and make room for grassroots candidates.
My question is for Richard Conlin. I was hearing you say that a $15 an hour minimum wage might be something that is positive, and so I was wondering if you're publicly stating that you support $15 an hour minimum wage, and if so, if you could share with us your plan to implement that.
With most of the rest of us who are in office, I don't think anybody who's in office has committed themselves to a $15 an hour minimum wage. There are a lot of questions as to what the right minimum wage should be, how you get there. We'd much prefer to see it done on the state level, minimum wage increases done on the state level, because there are questions about if you do it in Seattle, what's going to happen to some of the businesses and small businesses in particular that may have choices and options about where to go. So no, I'm not endorsing a $15 an hour minimum wage. What I'm saying is that I am working with SEIU to help build a path that will increase not only the minimum wage, but also provide other things that will help working people get the things that they need. For example, we're doing a massive campaign right now to try and get the 60,000 people who are eligible for health care under the Affordable Care Act in Seattle, who don't have health care now, to make the call, to get out and start doing the process so that they can get health care by January 1st. That's the kind of thing we can do that will help everybody. Thank you.
Ethan, right here, Ethan.
Most people here probably know that there's this Gateway Pacific Terminal, the largest coal export terminal that is proposed to be built in Washington State near Bellingham. It would bring 48 million tons of coal through Seattle every year. It would be North America's largest coal export terminal in the entire continent. One study found that if it is built and all the coal that is burnt in Southeast Asia from these coal trains coming through Seattle and the coal that would be shipped to Southeast Asia would be just as bad as the Keystone, it would be just as bad for climate change as the Keystone XL pipeline. So there's also, so my question, it's also supposed to destroy traffic in Seattle and have public health problems and all sorts of things when they should be creating green jobs instead of these environmentally destructive coal jobs. So my question to Richard Conlin is, why did you accept the maximum donation from BNSF Railroad Company, one of the main companies behind the coal trains? I know that you guys have passed, the City Council has passed a resolution against the coal terminal, but will you do more? Will you speak out more? For example, you had a public hearing recently and didn't even, on climate change, you didn't even mention this giant coal terminal.
Great. The City Council, as you pointed out, has unanimously opposed the coal terminal. I'm proud that Mayor McGinn has created a leadership caucus that's brought together a whole bunch of people from around this area. We're all working together. We've got a lot of different things that we're doing to try and oppose the coal terminal. Let me talk about BNSF. BNSF is somebody I've worked with for a long time on freight mobility in this area. They're very concerned about jobs in the industrial area. They're very concerned about the proposed basketball arena, which they thought was going to be potentially a problem in terms of the way in which industrial jobs worked and how freight mobility worked. I worked with them on that. I disagree with them on some other things. I have more than 1,000 people and organizations and companies that have donated to my campaign. I don't apply a litmus test to most of them. The only thing that I refuse to take money from is the tobacco companies, because I think their main business is to basically destroy people's lives. But most of the companies that are involved in this in the city of Seattle have a lot of different things that they're good on, some things they're bad on. We work together to try and maximize the good from the things that they're good on.
I think that Richard's answer shows you what you should be voting for, what kind of change you should be voting for. He says he does not use a litmus test to decide who should donate to his campaign. But the reality is, it's not just the money that he and these other candidates are taking from the corporations, they're taking marching orders from the corporations. So it's not a coincidence that he has taken money from BNSF and that you won't find him actually fighting against the coal terminal. And what we see is that the city council's, climate action plan, it's a 96-page PDF document. You can look it up. The two phrases that don't appear in such a big document, coal train and mass transit. They are ignoring the two, one, the biggest problem, and the second, the biggest solution, one of the biggest solutions. And we need to fight for that. We need unionized green jobs. We don't need to destroy our environment to create jobs. That is a completely false choice. We should reject that. And the resolution is toothless. If you really want somebody to fight for you, you should have city council members who are willing to throw their bodies on the line, on the train track, to prevent this from happening. And the stranger who endorsed my candidacy called Richard Conlin a greenwashing liberal fraud. So.
My question is for the city council candidates. I read in the New York Times that developers are flocking to Seattle all over the country because their streets are going to be paved with coal here. Well, I noticed that the neighborhood streets are paved with potholes. These developers that come in to the city council get a place at the table. All the places at the table. Every time. They all go through. When they want permits to get something done, they go to the city council and it slides through just like...
What's the question, Rick?
The question is just, it's coming right along. If we, as individuals or a neighborhood group, go to the city council, we don't get a place at the table. We're treated as if we're buzzing mosquitoes, an annoyance, something to be forgotten or maybe crushed. Or perhaps we're pigeons scavenging for scraps on the floor while the big boys are at the table doing their thing. What would you two do to change that situation, to reverse that situation, to give neighborhoods and people back the place at the table that we had decades ago?
Thanks for the question, Rick. I've been working on neighborhood plans for many years. I bring neighborhood folks to the table. They're always at the table and they're represented. I want to tell you about one of the situations that happened last year. Last year we had neighborhood groups come to us and say, we are seeing developers come into our areas and find property lines that were not intended to be used as development sites and building houses on them in ways that were not compatible with our neighborhoods. I not only worked with those people, brought them to the table and figured out what we could do, but I sponsored legislation that established an emergency moratorium on that kind of development in order to allow us to work on ways in which we could have permanent regulations put in place. Everybody is represented. We listen to all people. There is no way in which you can say that we listen only to one side of these issues. The fact is that there is a lot of people in this community. We need to listen to everybody, figure out how we can make things happen. We need to work together as a city in order to make things better.
When Mr. Conlin says he needs to listen to everybody, what he means is that he needs to primarily or only listen to big business and real estate corporations. He has raised, he has $143,000. Almost half of it, $60,000, comes from real estate sources. One of his biggest donors is Hotel Mughal, who owns $140 million worth of real estate in downtown, Richard Hedreen. I mean, follow the money, right? Where is his loyalty going to go? And I think in terms of, whether neighborhood voices are being heard, I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Look at what happened to Roosevelt. I don't think the demands or requests of the Roosevelt neighborhood were unreasonable by any means. They were very reasonable requests that were completely shoved aside. And there's a theme here. Every time you make requests as ordinary people, Mr. Conlin and other people say, well, we can't move, we are lambs, we have to really work within the machine and so on. But when it's a question of pushing for the tunnel, pushing for the interests of corporations, then they are tigers. So it's your choice. Do you want a tiger for yourself or for corporations?
So my question is, police brutality has been a concern in Seattle for some time, and I'd like to hear each of the council candidates describe what they see as the situation in Seattle in terms of police brutality and what, if anything, they plan to do about it. Thank you.
I think the question about police brutality is extremely critical. Over the last several decades, we're seeing a systematic targeting of people of color, of activists, and you can look at the really, really abysmal record of the Seattle Police Department on this issue. And I think one of the things we need to do, first of all, is to indict the entire city political establishment for completely failing to come up with any real solution. And one of the things that my campaign is advocating for is a democratically elected civilian oversight committee with real teeth, with full powers of full subpoena, hiring and firing powers over the Seattle Police Department. We need to make the Seattle Police accountable to us, not the corporate political establishment. That is absolutely important, and we need to insist on on-person cameras. We need to insist a ban on tasers and all those things that we see against activists. And most of all, we need our community to be active. And the thing I'll tell you is that it's in their interest for you not to be active, and so we need to be active.
I'm also share the concerns that everybody has voiced about the incidents of brutality and acts of brutality on the part of some members of the police department. I also think it's very important to recognize and acknowledge that this is a minority, a small minority of the police department, and I think Councilmember O'Brien put it exactly right. It's the minority that needs to have enforcement against it, and we need to create a culture that makes sure that that minority is enforced against. And the idea of police officers standing around is it's unacceptable. So what we need to do is to build a new orientation in our police department. It needs to start with the police chief, who is going to be ready to make that commitment, with regulations that meet what has been required of us by the U.S. Department of Justice, with the right kind of training, the right kind of command structure. My belief is that one of the most important things is to have on-site supervision on the street by experienced officers, sergeants, who really know what's going on, who understand what the regulations are and what the fears are that people get subject to, and then can say to the young officers, no, you don't behave this way, you stop, you step back, you say, this is the way in which we treat people appropriately. So creating that nucleus of sergeants that are active and on the street is a practical way in which we might be able to actually address the questions of what has happened with those, in many cases, young officers who wind up either acting out of fear or out of lack of knowledge or whatever it is that they're doing, and stop them from doing that. And then we need to also get enforcement as well.